Fear is the currency that never collapses. And in Chainsaw Man, every devil is a bank account swelling or shrinking according to the interest we pay it in our minds. Before calculating who is the strongest, it's worth stating the rules of this ugly, airtight economy. Devils are born from human fear of a concept. The more widespread and primal the fear, the more monstrous the devil. A devil's death is a transfer, not an end. Killed in hell, it reappears on Earth. Killed on Earth, it reappears in hell. An eternal shuttle between two hostile offices stamping the same paperwork forever. Contracts are never free. They shave years off your life, auction off pieces of your body, or bind you to a fate that only announces itself when it's already too late to cut the rope. Fiends are corpses piloted by devils. Hybrids are humans fused with weapons through agreements that make them stubborn in ways that terrify even monsters. One terrifying exception breaks the loop. The Chainsaw Devil can, under the right conditions, erase certain devils from reality, sucking away the concept and everyone's memories of it. That's not a victory, but an edit to the universe. Keep these rules in your pocket as we walk the blood-slit corridors. Strongest is a trick question with a very real answer, and the answer changes depending on which corridor the lights go out in. You hear the first contender before you see him. The Chainsaw Devil, the thing behind Denji's crooked smile, is violence with a soundtrack. Inside Denji's hybrid shell, it looks like foolish endurance and a talent for not dying completely. In Pochita's true form, it's stranger, more vicious and large enough to make hell look like a workshop floor. The signature horror isn't the torque or the teeth, it's erasure. The devil ever existed. Not remember to forget, but total erasure. History loses a page and the binding tightens. That power doesn't just turn a fight. It picks up the chessboard and throws it into the sun. However, it's not automatic. Humanity weakens Denji's signal and protects him at the same time. He needs the right setup, the right bite, and time to chew. He is strongest when the world is noisy enough to hide him, and simple enough for him to want only one thing. When those conditions align, every other devil starts checking exits they were sure didn't exist. Power like that makes kings anxious, but a different crown sits comfortably on a different head. Control isn't a punch, it's the air pressure in the room. Makima, later Nayuta, embodies every reflex to obey, every flinch in the face of hierarchy. Control doesn't announce itself, it makes you announce it. It can force contracts, rewrite your priorities, weaponize organizations, and turn affection into a chain that tightens when you smile. In a world built from lines, boss and employee, parent and child, ruler and ruled, domination is as common as oxygen. That ubiquity is its fuel. Control wavers when trapped in a space where power relations dissolve into two beating hearts and nothing else, or when it encounters a force beyond its mechanisms, something that refuses to be part of a system. Otherwise, it wins without looking like it fought. Some horrors are older than language. The Darkness Devil doesn't enter scenes. It erases them and stands in the remaining silence. It's a primal fear, undiluted, unreincarnated, living proof that there are rooms in the human brain that never had curtains. Everything about it feels like dissecting hope. Sound stops at your eardrum, your skin decides it is prey, and the distance between you and the thing shrinks without any movement you can name. Darkness doesn't bargain and doesn't need metaphors. It amputates certainty and then your arm, usually in that order. The only theoretical limit on darkness is the ridiculous dream that one day humans might stop fearing the dark. Until then, it is one of the few devils that can maintain eye contact with anything and never blink. If darkness is a fossil from the first night, Gun is a modern god built in newsrooms and factories. The Gun Devil isn't a person so much as a statistic incarnate, a catastrophe measured in casualties per second. It achieved something like divinity by aligning with the 20th century's loudest heartbeat, the headline. Even shattered into dozens of pieces and hoarded like sanctions, those fragments distorted geopolitics, spiked crime, and turned nations into desperate collectors. Reassembled, it was a storm front. Shattered, it remained a blade you could trip over every day. Gun proves that fear can be cultivated and redirected. Policy, culture, and attention don't banish the monster, but they absolutely determine its shape and how much we feed it. War reads history like a shopping list and never forgets to pick up milk. Yoru's power is hateful poetry. Ownership becomes a blade. Bonds become supplements. The sentence, "this is mine," sharpens into, "this will cut you." War swells and shrinks with the barometer of international anxiety. In peaceful times, it seethes. When swords rattle, it smiles and grows. Its ceiling is terrifying because humanity has never been good at living without enemies. Its floor is treacherous because a peaceful year is just gasoline in a cold engine. When it ignites, stored fear explodes into policy, parades, and funerals. War understands people better than people do themselves because it knows love and hatred run on the same tracks. Famine doesn't swing a sword, it pulls shelves from walls. Fami's battlefield is supply, ecology, appetite, and spirit. She plays 1,000-move games while everyone else argues about today's skirmish. You don't notice famine until your cupboards echo. By then, the fear multiplies faster than mold on bread. It's a silent apocalypse, less spectacular than beams of light or corridors of mangled corpses. But in a fragile system, it is ruthless, patient, and cruelly efficient. Famine kills without touching you. She leaves you to discover that you are made of needs. There is a final throne in this room, and it is occupied even when no one is looking. Death is the period at the end of every human sentence. We haven't seen the full face of the death devil, but logic draws its outline. The most universal fear, the most democratic law, and the one certainty that has never been vetoed. By default, that makes death the implied apex predator in this world, unless something steps outside the rulebook and edits the rule that says there must be an end. That's the chainsaw-shaped hole hanging over everything. If erasure can remove a concept, what happens if it bites the concept that visits us all? That single unanswered question is the only chain on death's implied crown. And the irony is that the chain is woven from fear of what the answer might be. Not all horrors wear medals. Eternity is the panic of a corridor looping back on itself, a hotel that swallows your footprints. It feeds on claustrophobia and despair, turning seconds into hours and hours into surrender. In its chosen environment, it feels invincible. With a steady pulse and a stubborn refusal to blink, it shrinks to fit the hand that holds you. The lesson eternity teaches is brutal and useful. Terrain is half the opponent. The aquarium and the endless floors aren't just scenery. They are the monster's throat. The angel devil is horror and soft focus. It kills by touch and saves years like coins, a mobile bank vault of stolen time. Its tragedy is that the more it resists violence, the more the world insists on weaponizing it. In another story, Angel would be a miracle. In this one, it is a battery. The future devil is the smug whisper of certainty, a con artist who sells you the right to see the punch coming and then dares you to waste the warning. Your future is the worst, it purrs, and somehow you still pay, because prediction, even a horrible one, feels like control. Curse is inevitability notarized. Once you sign, it keeps the schedule even if you change your mind. Ghost is the fear of the invisible hand on your shoulder, proof that absence of evidence can choke you just fine. The violence fiend is a storm wearing a muzzle, terrifying not only for what it does, but for how clearly it enjoys restraint until it doesn't. The blood fiend, power, treats creativity like a weapon and rules like a snack. There's a reason her chaos reads as charisma rather than noise. She embodies why fear and love don't cancel each other, they amplify. Then there are the hybrid exemplars that illustrate what technique and anatomy can do when welded to obsession. Bomb is seduction tied to a payload. She turns intimacy into explosion and romance into strategy. Katana is tradition grafted onto rage, a suit and tie with a guillotine for a soul. Doll, Santa Claus, shows the export market of fear, one person's horror outsourced as labor across the city. Falling deserves special mention among the primal fears. It's the fear that arrives the moment gravity reminds you that you're not in control. Falling doesn't need a speech. It only needs a ledge and a brain that knows what happens next. Its attacks are almost polite in their simplicity, and that's what makes them so persuasive. And woven throughout all of this is the ugly ecology of public safety contracts. Fox will lend you a bite if you lend it a limb. Snake wants everything and then a little more. A nail can be a cursed spear if you drive it with the right words. Case files lead to the trapdoor under the conversation. Strongest depends on location. In hell, the chainsaw devil plays at home. It's noisy there in a way that makes erasure easier to stage and harder to interrupt. On Earth, control owns the buildings, the laws, and the scripts. Power funds itself. In a blackout, darkness is king. In a rolling news cycle, gun is gospel. In shortages, famine is the weather. In mobilizations, war writes the calendar. If you insist on ranking without context, you get drunk on your own categories. If you separate types of dominance, the list becomes a map. The metaphysical ceiling belongs to the primal fears, darkness today, death in principle. Rule breaking belongs to the Chainsaw Devil because erasure beats reincarnation. Social dominance is control's domain, with gun, war, and famine swelling or shrinking according to the era. Who wins in a fight? Becomes the wrong question. Who sets the conditions of the fight? Is the only one that holds true. It helps to slow down and tell 3 stories that prove the rules instead of just stating them. First, the 20th century mass-produced fear like it mass-produced bread, and the factory output minted the gun devil like a coin. Headlines are rituals, daily incantations repeating a name until it grows teeth. Media can summon as cleanly as any chalk circle on a cathedral floor. That's why gun fragments acted like policy, and policy acted like food. The fear wasn't just in our hearts, it was printed and distributed. Second, love and loyalty became chains in control's hands. The scariest devils don't sharpen claws. They sharpen obedience. A nation's worth of unspoken rules, every unreturned favor, each unacknowledged crush. Makima braided them into rope and made everyone grateful to be leashed. That's scarier than raw power because it doesn't look like coercion. Third, the funniest lesson wore a holiday mask and turned out to be a horror movie anyway. Too much information is as scary as a knife. Knowledge without escape is a prison with glass walls. Eternity aquarium, whatever shape it takes. The moral remains, if you can't get out, more facts only teach you how your cage is built. With that foundation, the longer tour stops at places the quick version rushed past. Denji's limits aren't just plot leashes, they are ethical ones. The Chainsaw Devil can only become a world editor when Denji stops being a boy who wants stupid, beautiful things. Pochita's promise, to show him the simple dreams he never had time for, anchors the apocalypse to a stray dog's hope. He, paradoxically, is more dangerous when treated like an object, because it empties him out. Fill him with friends, food, and a roof that doesn't leak, and he becomes hard to weaponize on a cosmic scale, but unstoppable on a human scale. That duality is the humane center of a very inhumane setting. A miracle that the end of the world is also someone who wants breakfast. Makima's horror was never the beam spam. It was the paperwork. She turned bureaucracy into body armor and affection into artillery. Her contracts looked like recruitment posters and love letters because she understood that people don't sign away freedom under duress. They sign because they want to be chosen. That's why the transfer of the Control Devil to Nayuta matters. A god of chains raised with boundaries and kindness might still be terrifying, but the horror points in a different direction. You don't change a primal law. You teach it table manners and pray that's enough. Darkness on first contact teaches anatomy with a bone saw. The Train to Hell isn't a set piece. It's a lecture. The way bodies are arranged, the way sound dies. That's a kind of pedagogy. Here are the tools I use. Here is how you fail. What made that encounter unforgettable wasn't just the mangled limbs. It was the social collapse within the team. Darkness doesn't just remove light. It removes the pretense that anyone is in control. That's why even veterans froze. You can train for guns and practice for war. You can't practice the moment your nervous system decides you don't exist. The Gun Devil, by contrast, is mathematics with blood. Timers, percentages, trajectories. It made horror legible to politicians, an obscene sentence, and that's the point. It turned grief into policy and policy into a market, and occasionally it collected interest through a massacre to remind everyone the line on the graph was still pointing up. Fighting the whole gun is impossible, so the story fights it in parts, fragments lodged in people, nations, rituals, because that's how gun actually lives, in circulation. You can't kill circulation. You can only interrupt it and change its route. War in its current host is a different beast from a mushroom cloud, but the logic is the same. Yoru's pettiness and Asa's wounded pride are the right scale for a devil that grows on the fertilizer of human smallness. Wars don't start because people study Clausewitz. They start because someone decides an insult is a wound and a wound is casus belli. The way Yoru turns belongings into blades is an allegory without metaphor. We weaponize what we love to hurt what we hate, and then pretend to be surprised by the collateral damage. War will always be strong as long as humans love anything they can lose. Famine's long game shows up most clearly when nothing seems to be happening. It's the meeting that should have been an email, the logistics delay, the crop failure 3 borders away. Fami's attacks, when they land, look like accidents and governance failures and weather. The genius of that horror is deniability. You don't fight famine with a sword. You fight by admitting you share a stomach with your enemies, that your supply chains and theirs run on the same planet. She wins whenever pride refuses that admission. If death is the implied apex, falling is its rehearsal. There's a reason many nightmares end with a sudden drop. The falling devil weaponizes that reflex, the moment you're certain you'll lose contact with everything, and builds a theater around it. The routes she uses to reach people are culinary, almost polite. The cruelty is that taste and memory are invaded by something so simple you can't argue your way out. The most unsettling detail about falling isn't the spectacle. It's how her victims barely need convincing. Gravity does most of the work. The supporting cast of devils completes the ecology and proves that even minor fears can bloom into major disasters with the right soil. Curse makes every legal contract in the world look like a summoning circle if you stare long enough. Future proves that prophecy without courage is cowardice with a nice hat. Angel makes the pacifist's dilemma physical. To save lives, you must spend lives. Ghost shows that grief is a kind of haunting you can hand off to someone else. Violence proves that even a leash is a weapon in both directions. Blood through power turns selfishness into an art form so gaudy you can't help but love it. And love, in this setting, is a loaded gun. 2 longer case studies reveal how setting is not just backdrop, but ammunition. The Eternity encounters, first in the looping hotel, later in the aquarium, aren't just puzzles. They are sermons on how fear multiplies in closed systems. The hotel taught panic. The aquarium taught pettiness, how resentment grows into violence when people are trapped long enough to notice their differences. Neither monster is the strongest, but each becomes unbeatable if the victims choose the wrong emotions. Conversely, both collapse when someone in the room chooses a misfit emotion, love, spite, boredom, that the devil didn't budget for. That, in a sentence, is Chainsaw Man's thesis on fighting. Victory is often a misfit emotion at the right volume. The International Assassin's arc does the same trick on a global scale. Doll shows how fear franchised across borders becomes logistics. Bomb shows how intimacy can be militarized with flowers and a smile. Katana shows how tradition refuses to retire even when stapled to a nightmare. None of them would matter if the Chainsaw Devil were only a fighter. They matter because Denji is a person. His capacity to be fooled, to want, to choose badly and then stubbornly choose again, that's the margin by which these monsters get close enough to hurt him. In other words, the human part of the hybrid is the shield that keeps the apocalypse at bay, and the hole through which the apocalypse takes aim. That's not a contradiction. That's the cost of having a heart. So what does strongest mean after all that? If you're asking about the peak of raw metaphysical horror, the crown belongs to the primal fears. Darkness now. Death in principle, because their fears are universal. Unteachable and don't need organizations to stay fed. If you're asking whose ability bends the rules of existence, it's the Chainsaw Devil, because erasure beats reincarnation, and the editor ranks above the actors. If you're asking who rules the world most days of the week, it's control, because most of human life happens inside systems, and systems amplify obedience better than shouting. If you're asking who can crash a century, gun, war, and famine take turns as weather systems that decide the climate in which everyone else must fight. Those answers aren't mutually exclusive. They're time slots on the same program. The scariest part is how they cooperate without shaking hands. Night falls. Darkness takes the first shift. Orders are given. Control takes attendance. Swords rattle. War writes its name in calendars. Shelves empty. Famine sends a press release. Someone finally shouts, "Enough!" And the boy with a pull cord in his chest revs an engine that never learned the word stop. The board doesn't reset so much as flicker. Someone is always paying fear into the market, and the market never closes. The honest answer to who is the strongest is threefold and unsatisfying. The one that defines the rules, the one that edits the story, and the one we're investing in today. The first is usually death or darkness. The second is a chainsaw with a dog's heart. The third is whatever our headlines, habits, and hungers make bigger, when we throw attention at them. That, finally, is the sneaky hope the series slips into the gore. If fear is currency, attention is the mint. We can't zero out fear, and we shouldn't try. Fear keeps us from stepping off roofs to see what happens. But we can decide which accounts to fund. We can notice when we're being asked to obey rather than understand. We can remember that love, chosen freely and stubbornly, is not a leash unless we allow it. And we can be honest that sometimes the strongest thing in the room is a ridiculous, selfish, shameless desire to live long enough to eat breakfast with people who know our names. In a universe where concepts have teeth, that desire is both a target and a weapon. It won't erase death or silence darkness, but it can keep control hungry, starve war for a season, embarrass famine, and, if you pull it, give the chainsaw devil a reason to bite the right thing at the right time.